Hey, welcome back to the channel. It's Two Commas, and today we are going to be talking about Ace to 5 triple draw. So Ace to 5 triple draw is one of those games that you will occasionally see in your cash game mix, but not as much as it used to be played because it is one of the oldest forms of low ball poker. But today you mainly see deuce to 7 over ace to 5. Ace to 5 is kind of like the ignored stepchild or the cousin you don't want to play with anymore. But it does come up occasionally in tournaments. For instance, one of the tournaments I like to play the most is the $2,500 mixed triple draw game at the WSOP, where they play deuce to 7, Badoogie, and ace to 5. So sometimes you'll see it in a tournament format, but most of the time you're going to see it in Badacey. Badacey is a game that is still often played in your mixed cash games, and that's where you're going to need to know how to play ace to 5. So that's what we're going to talk about today, and hopefully it will up your game and make you more profitable. So first, let's talk about the rules of ace to 5. So it's very similar to deuce to 7. And basically is the same game, just with different hand rankings. So what do I mean by that? Well, aces are low in ace to 5, and the nuts is ace 2, 3, 4, 5. So right there is different from deuce to 7, and straights and flushes don't hurt you. So it doesn't matter if all your cards are the same suit, and obviously a straight doesn't hurt you because ace 2, 3, 4, 5 is the nuts. So that's a few key differences between deuce to 7 and ace to 5. It's still a single winner game, so you're not going to have a split pot unless someone else has the same hand as you. And you are also going to have 3 draws to make your hand. It is a limit game, so most mixed games are played in the limit format, meaning you're going to play an 8-16 game or a 4-8 game or an 80-160 game. And basically that means there are 4 rounds of betting, and the first 2 rounds are that first denomination. So in the 8-16 example, $8 would be the increment you're betting in and raising in on the first 2 rounds. And then $16 would be the increment you're raising in for the second 2 rounds. So things get more expensive after the second draw, and that is where you need to know whether or not you're going to be sticking with your hand, because again, in these limit games, single bets matter. The difference between profitable and losing poker players is not knowing when to let go of a hand, because single bets add up to a lot of money. So those are the basic rules. You're dealt 5 cards, you get 3 draws to make your hand. You're going to bet after you're dealt the cards or fold. And then you're going to have a betting round after each draw, including the last one. And the person with the lowest hand wins. And remember, in low ball games, you start at the highest card. That denotes your hand ranking. So if you have 8, 4, 3, deuce, ace, you have an 8 low. Okay. And if someone else has 7, 6, 4, 3 deuce, they win because they have a 7 low, and you're looking for the lowest cards in your hand. So again, you want to be obviously trying to get ace 2, 3, 4, 5, but you don't want high cards in your hand. So let's talk a little bit about strategy, which is what I'm assuming most people are on this channel for, once you get the basics down and the rules down. So as always in poker, it's position, position, position. And it's even more important in triple draw games because you get additional information based on the number of cards your opponent draws. So it's very important to play in position with your weaker hands. And if you're out of position or if you're early in position, you want to have stronger starting cards. So that's always going to be my advice in any poker situation, but definitely in your triple draw games. Now, additionally, it's my philosophy that you should aim for a 7 or lower in ace to 5. So meaning if you have 5 cards that you've been dealt, if you are dealt ace, 3, 5, 7, 10, you are automatically getting rid of the 10, and you can probably keep the 7, and this depends on how the betting action goes and what position you're in and what have you. But ultimately, you're obviously trying to get better than a 7, but a 7 is probably going to be a decent hand that has a good chance of taking down the pot, depending on how the action goes. In ace to 5, you want to play a tight but aggressive style of play. So like Mike McDermott and Rounders.
Cards to a flush. If it's good enough to call, you got to be in there raising, all right? I mean, tight but aggressive. And I do mean aggressive. That's your style, Professor. I mean, you gotta think of it as a war.
You don't want to limp into pots. You always want to raise to deny the big blind equity. Equities run close in these games, and so you want to get players out of the hand that may be able to draw a winning hand against you because you let them in for the right price. So let's talk about opening ranges. So if you're in early position, again, you have to play more tight. And so I would recommend, again, aiming for that 7. If you have 4 cards, 7 or lower, I think you could probably come into the pot. If you're in the small blind, I'm going to recommend a raise or fold strategy, meaning that if your hand is good enough to come into the pot, you should be coming in with a raise. If it's not good enough to raise, then it's not good enough to play because you're going to be out of position the entire way and you should just let the hand go. Now, also when in early position, you need to think about what are your starting opening ranges going to be. I think that because you need to play tight in opening position, you need to either have a made 7 if you're going to enter the pot, or you need to have 4 cards to a 6 or 4 cards to a wheel. I think that is the best strategy for coming into a ace to 5 hand in early position. If you're in late position, and in particular on the button, your ranges open up dramatically. You can come into the pot with a much wider hand selection. You can obviously come in with all of the hands that you would have in opening position or an early position. But you can also include 3 card hands to the wheel. So if you have an ace, a 3, a 5, obviously you can come in. You can come in with 3 cards to a 6 as well, I think, in late position and in particularly the button. But you can also come in with some 2 card hands, a little bit more risky, but you could also come in if you're on the button with, I would say, ace 2 through 3, 4. So in other words, ace 2, ace 3, ace 4, 2, 4, 2, 3, etc. are hands that you could also come in if you're on the button. Now, I said that you want to have a very tight hand selection when it comes to your starting cards. And this is important because one of the things that a lot of poker players fall into the trap of is, especially in limit games, is that when you get further into the pot and into the hand, you are going to have pot odds to keep calling bets because there's going to be so much money in the pot. One more bet is normally going to give you the right odds to call, although you may be in a losing scenario. You can avoid the trouble by just starting with better hands. You want to be drawing smooth as much as possible. What does drawing smooth mean? Drawing smooth means you want to have the cards on the lower end of your hand be as low as possible towards the nuts. So for instance, drawing smooth is ace 2, 3, 4, and you're trying to draw a 5, right? Now you might end up with a 7 or an 8, but a 7, 4, 3, deuce, ace is much better than you have 3, 5, 6, 7 in your hand and you're trying to draw an ace. That's not, you don't want to draw in reverse. You want to draw from the bottom up, because in that case you might end up drawing an 8, and if you got an 8, 7, 6, 4 deuce, that's a terrible hand. You might as well have a 9 in that situation. So you want to draw as smooth as possible. Drawing smooth gives you a little bit more flexibility later in the hand. in your drawing and in your betting and what have you. But if you're drawing rough, right, meaning you're drawing to higher cards in the process, you're going to put yourself in a bad situation, and you're going to end up calling again those single bets that add up over time. You don't want to do that. So always draw from the bottom up. You want to start with your ace 2, 3 in ace to 5, and the cards that you need are the higher cards, not the lower cards. Too many times I'm in a hand playing with somebody, and you normally just call out your top card whenever you make a hand. So I'll say something like, I've got a 7. And then the person will say, 7 what? Well, that means they have a 7 too, right? So then you say 7-5, and they say 7-5 what? Which means they have a 7-5 also. At this point, if you don't have an ace in your hand, you've lost, right? Because you're going to say 7-5, 4-3 deuce, and they're going to say 7-5, 3 deuce ace, and they're going to win because they drew from the bottom up and you drew higher than they did. Another thing you need to know when you're playing ace to 5 and any triple draw game for that matter is when to break when you're on your last draw. And in deuce to 7, it's fairly widely known that you should stand pat on a jack if you are in position and someone is still drawing 1, because it's more likely that they're either going to draw a worse jack than you or they're going to pair. And in ace to 5, it's obviously a little bit different because the hand rankings are different. So I recommend that if you are in position, okay, you are in position, meaning you're going to act last, that you stand pat on a 9 if your opponent is still drawing at least 1 card. If they're drawing more than 1 card, then you definitely stand pat on a 9. But if they're drawing 1 card, you stand pat on a 9. If they are not drawing any cards, if they're pat, I would break the 9. Okay? That's if you're in position, because you get to get that information that you wouldn't normally have if you're playing out of position. So what do you do if you're playing out of position? You break. If you're playing out of position, you would need to go ahead and let go of that 9 and hope that you draw good, because likely if you draw, the opponent behind you is going to stand pat, and they might stand pat on a weaker hand. So you do have some opportunities there. But if you're out of position, break a 9, keep an 8. If you're in position, keep the 9. In some situations, depending on your opponents, if they're not that good of players, if they tend to draw rough, you might even be able to keep a 10. But you always keep an 8 in any situation unless the action has been raise, the person has been standing pat for a couple of streets, then you know that an 8's no good. But if both players are going into the final draw and the person in front of you takes a card, stand pat on the 9. If the person in front of you doesn't take any cards, break the 9. So lastly, I want to talk about when to snow, when to bluff. I don't know. Again, I don't know why they call it snowing in triple draw games, but when to bluff in ace to 5 is you want to start thinking about setting those bluffs up early in the process, meaning you've got a lot of low cards in your hand, or you've seen a lot of low cards come through after the first draw. So if you start off with ace, 4-4, right? And it doesn't actually matter if you're in position, not in position, but if you're in position, it's definitely better to do it. But in any case, you've got 3 cards that are the most important card in the deck, the ace. And you've got 2 4s, which are also cards that your opponent probably needs. So you might want to start thinking about, if your draw doesn't go well, when you throw away the 2 aces and the 4, you might want to start thinking about setting up a bluff. So let's say you throw away your 2 aces and a 4, so you're left with an ace and a 4, and you draw 3, 3, king, right? Well, now you have ace, 3, 4, you have that you can keep, but you also have another 3 that your opponents are going to need, and a king. I might consider, you do have a draw to the wheel, so it wouldn't be anything wrong with potentially drawing in that particular situation. But you also had 75% of the aces, 50% of the threes, and 50% of the fours that your opponent are going to need to make a hand. What I would do is start thinking about running a bluff right then. I would throw away the king on the second draw, and no matter what you get, you stand pat, unless the opponents start raising and re-raising in front of you based on their actions. So, but let's say that, they're drawing one or two cards, they still draw one or two cards. I stand pat no matter what I got on my second draw. So let's say my second draw was a jack. So now my hand is ace, 3-3, 4, jack. Obviously, that's not a winning hand, right? But you go ahead and stand pat and bet on the third draw into your opponent, because likely they didn't make a hand that can stand up to a bet on the river, and you're going to put yourself in a decent chance to win the pot. Now, sometimes you get called. If you don't get caught bluffing sometimes, then you're not bluffing enough. But the example of when to start thinking about doing it is when you've seen a lot of low cards that you know your opponent's going to need. So there you have it, ace to five triple draw. One of my favorite games to play. I don't get to play it as often as I like, but sometimes I'll suggest that we play Badesi instead of Badusi so we can still get a little ace to five action in there. Hopefully you learned something in today's video. Hopefully you will become a more profitable poker player after incorporating some of these strategies and tips. If you got some value out of the video, do me a favor, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. It will allow me to bring you some more content and also share my poker exploits from around the world. And let's tune in next time where I will create some videos for you on Badesi, Badusi, Archie, and some of the other crazy mixed games that we play in Las Vegas and in other casinos. All right, take care.